for being here today. First, I want to begin by beginning with a land acknowledgement and set the tone for our program this morning. Again, we respectfully acknowledge that the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson is on land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home for 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Tohono and the Pasquiyaki people. We also humbly acknowledge that for most of its history, our organization has not been welcoming to people of color. To quote our CEO of the League of Women Voters, U.S., Virginia Casey Solomon, during the civil rights movement, the League was not as present as we should have been while activists risked life and limb to register Black voters in the South. The League's work and our leaders will later join in to help protect all voters at the polls. It wasn't until 1966 that we reached our first position to combat discrimination. Still, our focus on social policy was from afar, not on the front lines, and African Americans were shadowed of the vision of the League. Today, we invite all people, regardless of gender, gender identity, ability, ethnicity, or race, to join us as we commit to righting the wrongs of our past and building a stronger, more inclusive democracy. Thank you for being here today, and welcome. And back to our moderator.
Thank you, Victor, for that introduction and the inspiring words from our CEO at the national level, Virginia Casey Solomon. I'm excited the topic of debating election reform was chosen for this month's public program. Arizona voters are likely to face competing ballot propositions that may change the way voters cast their ballots. Two components in these ballot propositions are ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff, and open primaries, including aspects such as top 5 primary. Two of our local league members with expertise in these areas will debate the pros and cons of these reforms. Betsy Boggia will highlight the merits of these reforms, and Barbara Norrander will describe the concerns over these reforms. Our third panelist, Vivian Harte, will explain the content of the various ballot propositions. The presentations by the panelists will be followed by a Q&A session for the last segment of the program. We encourage you to join in the conversation. Please put your questions on the index cards provided, and league members will be picking them up. I'm going to start by introducing all three panelists. Our first panelist is Betsy Boggia. A Massachusetts native, Betsy relocated to Tucson in 2021, where she is currently the organizing director for Voter Choice Arizona, a board member of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson, and chair of the State League Ranked Choice Voting Issue Team. Prior to that, Betsy helped collect 60,000 signatures as regional director for Arizonans for fair elections. In Massachusetts, Betsy got her start in community organizing and political activism as co-founder of the Greater Boston chapter of Million Mile March for Gun Control. Worked in the Massachusetts State Legislature and successfully worked with Governor Charlie Baker's office to have September 22nd, 2021 recognized as the International Day of Peace throughout Massachusetts. Over the years, Betsy has volunteered her time as chair of the Women's Impact Network for the Charles River Chamber of Commerce, as a town meeting member for 6 years, on countless political campaigns, and as a member of her local League of Women Voters. She is a tireless advocate for children, women, peace, and equity. Betsy has a bachelor's in history and certification in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next is Barbara Norrander. Barbara is an emeritus professor in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona, where she taught courses on American government for 32 years. Her research focuses on voters and elections, with a particular interest in primary elections. She is the author of The Imperfect Primary: Oddities, Biases, and Strengths in U.S. Presidential Nomination Politics, 3rd edition, as well as a variety of journal articles and book chapters on primary elections. Her research also covers the gender gap in elections and public opinion. She was past president of the Western Political Science Association and served on a variety of academic boards and received the Outstanding Professional Achievement Award from the Midwest Women's Caucus for Political Science in 2020. Barbara is the current Public Programs Chair for the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. And finally, our third panelist is Vivian Harte. Vivian is a former president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson and currently the acting chair of the League's Speakers Bureau. She taught college classes in sociology and writing at Lima Community College and the University of Phoenix for over 14 years. She currently teaches online classes on assertiveness, self-confidence, and teamwork to students worldwide and coaches people on confidence and assertiveness. She is a co-author of the book Self-Esteem for Dummies. Vivian has a bachelor's in sociology from Indiana University and a master's in public administration from the U of A, and her focus was solar energy policy. In the 1990s, she was the chair of the statewide group Concerned Arizonans for Renewable Energy that was successful in having many pieces of solar legislation passed by the Arizona legislature. She was a commissioner on the Tucson-Pima County Metropolitan Energy Commission and the chair of the Arizona Solar Energy Association, which is a chapter of the American Solar Energy Society, and was dedicated to educating the public about solar energy. So we'll start with Betsy explaining open primaries and arguing in favor.
I'm very grateful to be here for this opportunity to speak to all of you, and I'm very honored to share the stage with Barbara and a little intimidated. So I do the best I can. So, before I start diving into talking about open primaries and eventually ranked choice voting in Washington, this is a good election reform. Can you hear me? Okay.
Louder.
I will try louder. Let me know. Yeah. I just want to frame this by saying that we have a voting problem in this country before we even get to how we vote. On average, in presidential elections, 53% of voters turn out. That means fully 47%, or almost half of us, don't bother to vote in presidential elections. And those numbers are even half in local elections. So we can talk about election reform, which is important, but we have to do that understanding that we have to incentivize voting. There's other things that we need to do to get people to turn out and vote. So, but it's important to create systems that do encourage people participating and that don't create barriers. So that's what I'm talking about today. So why say yes to open primaries and ranked choice voting? All right, let's see if this works. Here we go. I'm going to start with some definitions, and these are just a few definitions. There are two main structures to a primary election: rules for counting the votes and rules for who can vote. So let's start with just understanding what primaries are. And I'm looking at a closed primary. There's more than this, but I'm just going to discuss these three. In a closed primary, only partisans can vote. If you're a member of the Democrat or Republican Party, you can vote. If you're an independent, you cannot. A semi-closed primary, where if you're a member of a party, you can vote. And if you're an independent, you can request in Arizona, 29 days before the election, if you want to do mail-in voting, you have to contact the recorder's office and get a ballot mailed to you for a particular party, or you can go into the polling place on election day and request a ballot for a particular party. So that's how we vote in Arizona. And then there's open primaries, where you don't have to register for a party. All of the candidates, regardless of party, appear on the same ballot. Every voter, regardless of party, gets that ballot, and you just select your candidates and vote. No, you cannot switch between the Democrat and Republican candidates. You still have to vote a slate for a party, but there's no additional barriers if you're an independent voter to voting in an open primary. So what's the problem with a closed primary or a semi-closed primary? One, low turnout, where you have a minority deciding for the majority. I think in Arizona in 2022, less than 25% of voters turned out to vote in the primary, and of those, only 10% were independents. So what does that mean for the electeds, for the candidates who are running for office? You know you only have to appeal to a small slice of very partisan voters who are going to vote for you. Your partisan voters are your donors, and that's who you're speaking to. And if you get those people to vote for you, then you're on to the general election, where we have a binary choice, either or. That's where the majority turn out, but the decision has effectively already been made for you, because if you align with either party, that's who you're gonna vote for, whether you like that candidate or not. And we have disenfranchised independent voters in a taxpayer-funded system. So oftentimes, especially in close primaries, you'll hear, well, why should we let independents vote in a party primary? They're not a member of the party. But parties aren't exclusive country clubs. There's no membership dues. There's no ethics that you have to adhere to. There's no standard for membership. You simply check a box when you register to vote. And the fact of the matter is, you and I are paying for the primary. It's not like at the end of the primary, the parties get a bill. We pay for it, so why shouldn't we be able to vote as an independent? And when we get to the general, where everybody can vote, nobody's quibbling about independent voters, everybody's going after them. Especially in a state like Arizona, where you've got practically a third, and a third, independents, Democrats, and Republicans. When you get to the general, everybody wants those independents to swing for them. So why do we create barriers for them to participate in a primary? And I've thrown in what I think are some fun quotes. And I just want to point out that the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, is not Albert Einstein. I did a deep dive on this a lot of time this week. So we really can't attribute, we really don't know who to attribute it to. So what are the benefits of open primaries? And this is very similar to what we talk about the benefits of ranked choice voting potentially being. Mitigate negative campaigning and minimize polarization. And polarization is what has gotten us to this point. And mitigate negative campaigning, if you're not only speaking to the smallest slice of the electorate and your partisan voters and donors, but you have to speak to a broader slice, more moderate members of your party and maybe the independents, then you're going to talk about policy. You're going to talk about things that matter to the broadest swath of the electorate. And that should mitigate negative campaigning and polarization. We're changing the incentives for electeds. In our current system, electeds have a very unfavorable choice once they get into office. They can either stay in office or do what they think is the right thing to do. Because they run the risk of being primaried by their own party if they don't toe the partisan party line. And we've seen this play out most recently, unfortunately, in the Republican Party, where both Rusty Bowers and Liz Cheney were effectively thrown out of their own party for doing what they thought was the right thing to do. And I've had the pleasure of hearing Rusty Bowers speak, and it's very disheartening and demoralizing to hear him talk about, in the past, here's an elected official who's really devoted his life to governance, working across the aisle with his colleagues, and then in recent years, his own party refusing to speak to him because he chose to speak to his Democratic colleagues. We can't govern that way. We have to be able to come together and talk to each other. Like a good, lawyers say a good divorce is where everybody's unhappy. That's what governance is about. You get in the room, you hammer it out, you compromise until you come to a mutually agreed decision. Where nobody may be happy, it may not be what everybody wants, but it's what's best for the majority. We're not doing that anymore. We've effectively tied the hands of our leaders to get anything done. And those of you who were at the League of Women Voters breakfast yesterday know what I'm talking about. It was heartbreaking to listen to our elected officials talk about important things like water, housing, and the environment, but how their bills never get out of committee or get a hearing and their hands are effectively tied to do anything that the majority of Arizonans really care about. So, and we have the opportunity to increase turnout and enfranchise independent voters if we open up the primary. And why would we want to do that? This country is founded on the premise that we can all vote. Why would we want people participating in our elections? So, when we talk about open primaries, we can't talk about them divorced from what happens in the general. And there's a couple of different versions of open primaries. So, there's 5 states right now that have nonpartisan primaries. California, Nebraska, and Washington all have an open primary and then what's known as a top 2. So the top 2 finishers in the primary go on to the general, where you vote for them. Louisiana famously has what is known as their jungle primary, which is a little more complicated. I'm not going to get into that. Alaska has an open primary where the top 4 finishers go on to the general election, and there use a ranked choice ballot to rank the candidates. So here's some outcomes of the different types of primaries and what we're seeing. And this is a 2022 study by a bipartisan, can't read it, the bipartisan policy center. And so you can see in elections where you had open primary in the top 2 and elections where you had open primary in the top 4, turnout did go up in participation, and that's what we should all be hoping for. So, let's talk about independent voters. We don't really like to talk about independent voters, like I said, until the general election, where they become very important. As you can see, it's important to understand the demographics. Third of Arizona voters are independent. Almost half of voters nationwide now identify as independent. 50% of millennials are independent. And we also need to look at our population. That's why I've included data on Latinos. Right now, Latino people who identify as Latino in the state are 30%, but in a little over 10 years, they're slated to be more than 50% of the electorate. And 40% of them identify as registered independents. And earlier polling shows that they don't feel they need to be loyal to a party, and they also would like to have nonpartisan primaries. And it's important to pay attention to this. We can't just dismiss these voters. And why do people register as independents? Is it because they just don't care? They can't be bothered? I mean, or sometimes it's because the data says they're not a monolith, but a lot of independents are more policy driven, and they care not about the parties, about the issues, and they want the ability to vote for whatever platform they think most reflects their values. So I think independent voters right now are hearing the coal mine. And if you look at data for Arizona in the last 20 years, the number of people that have defected from both parties and the number of people that have joined the independent party is roughly equal. And so to me, that says people are unhappy with the behavior of the parties, and this is the one way they have of expressing that. And we need to pay attention to that, and we need to enfranchise those voters. So it's not to say that the parties aren't important, but the parties are not serving the needs of the voters at this point, and we need to be careful about that. It's not that they don't care, it's that their needs are not being met by our current system. So one other stat I want to leave you with is in 2020, only 10% of eligible Americans nationwide cast ballots in primary elections that effectively decided the winners in a supermajority 83% of congressional seats. That's not good. Yeah, that's no good. We need to do things that incentivize and increase participation and increase people's sense that our elected officials actually are getting things done that matter to all of us. So I'm going to end it there. And with a reminder from George Washington. The parties, it's not the weekend of parties, even though some of our founding fathers didn't like it, but we need to be careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. So I'm going to talk about the component of the open primary proposals that suggest that we should have a top 5, where the people who get in the top 5 rankings in a primary would go on to the general election. So this is a reform that has not been used. It questions about what kind of candidates would make the top 5, what would be strategies for voters and candidates. And I am a strong supporter of political parties being central to American democracy. So again, having 5 candidates proceed to the general election is not a reform that has been used before. Alaska has a 1-year experience with the top 4. California and Washington have had top 2s for a longer period of time. But many studies suggest that the outcomes or the expectations that were thought about for these types of primaries, such as more moderate candidates getting elected, things like that, have not come to fruition. So I made up some, well, this isn't made up. This is based on the votes that were cast in the 2022 primary elections in Arizona, and these combine the votes from the Democratic and Republican candidates. So this is the one for the Senate. Mark Kelly was the incumbent, and he was not having any challengers from his party. That's quite common. Generally, incumbents are not challenged by someone from their party. There were a number of Republicans competing to be the opponent, and then there were a libertarian and a couple of write-ins. So this is actually the best case scenario for a top five, in that there are 5 credible candidates. You will notice that the libertarian candidate did not make the cut. It's highly unlikely that a libertarian candidate would make the cut in the top 5. So if you are interested in sort of the smaller parties, it would be very difficult for them to get into the top 5. Here's another example. This was a congressional district where Greg Stanton was the Democratic incumbent, and there were a number of Republican voters. But almost everybody made the top 5. So it's not really reducing the number of candidates that people would look at in the general election. So what's the purpose of a primary if almost all the candidates will end up on the general election? Here's another example. This is Andy Bates' district, which is heavily Republican. He was not challenged as the incumbent. In these kinds of situations, it's often difficult to find an opposition candidate willing to run, and there are a number of congressional races where there are no opposition candidates just simply because the incumbent matches the district very well. So this would put forward 3 write-in questions, 3 write-in candidates. And do we really want on the general election ballot someone who got 66 votes? So the strategies, they need to get that one vote that a voter is going to cast. And I actually would claim that it leads to negative voting or negative campaigning, because what they want to do is they want to discourage people from voting for the other candidates and to vote for themselves. So the idea is that they want to make sure that other candidates have a lower vote total than they do, and so they will campaign in a negative way towards the other candidates rather than positive. There's no incentive for them to moderate their position because, again, they probably can get the votes they need to get into the top 5 without trying to figure out who those moderate voters are, who those independent voters are, and the like. And that's going to make the campaigning more expensive. They are going to have to try to figure out who do they send their mailers to. Things along that line. If they have a partisan primary, they can figure out and be more able to pinpoint who they might want to campaign and try to get support from. Let's look at the strategies for voters in the top 5. So voters can do 2 things. They can be sincere voters, which is they vote for their favorite candidate regardless. Or they can be strategic voters. Voting for a candidate they don't quite like as well, but who they think would be better able to win an election. So there's no incentive for a voter in the top 5 to be a strategic voter, because again, 5 candidates are going to the general election ballot, and therefore they don't really need to think about electability in their vote choice. So there's no incentive for them to go for a moderate candidate or a more electable candidate. They can just vote sincerely for their candidate, even if their candidate is very liberal or very conservative. And parties are central to democracy, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that they are there. E.E. Schatzsnyder was a political scientist from the middle of the 20th century. And this is a quote I always used in my classes, where he discussed that political parties created democracy, modern democracy, and modern democracy is unthinkable without parties. And parties have First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court did make that decision back in the 80s. And so we shouldn't throw parties out, like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Parties are going to be there. We have to recognize that they're going to be there. If you don't like the way the parties are being run, The solution is to become more active in the parties. And I will actually say that closed primaries are a good thing because it makes people register in the parties in your broader base. In Arizona, when we have closed primaries, less than 10% of the population registered as independents. When we switch to semi-closed primaries, it just keeps going up every year until you get to the 30%. So the primary laws influence what people do, and closed primaries broaden the base. That's my unpopular thing.
Betsy will return to the podium to now talk about ranked choice voting.
Okay, good answer. So as I said before, there's two things, who gets to vote, and then how the votes are counted. So now we're talking about how the votes are counted, and, the one with the QR code is the first, that's the slide. Okay. So I don't know if everybody has their phone and if this will work, but if you want to scan the QR code, if you open up your camera, and hover it over the QR code, and I don't know if this is big enough to work, and if you're online, you can do this online, you'll see a yellow bar pop up. If you click on it, it's going to take you to a poll, and you can rank your favorite Thanksgiving foods. So you can see, you will be ranked choice voting in real time, and you'll be able to see the results should pop up in real time. You can see how that works. So what is ranked choice voting? It's an upgrade to the way that we vote that allows you to rank your candidates in order of preference, most favorite to least favorite, and the winner has to have a true majority, over 50% of the vote. Ranked choice voting right now is used in about 50 cities, counties, and municipalities across the country. In 2022, about between 10 and 15 million voters voted on a ranked choice ballot. Currently, Alaska and Maine use ranked choice voting for their statewide elections. Maine has a little bit of a different version, as we talked about. Alaska has an open primary with the final four in a ranked choice ballot, and they used it for the first time in 2022. And Ireland and Australia have always voted this way. At the turn of the century, there were about 20 states that had ranked choice voting in this country, and the parties did away with it. There's some more nefarious reasonings. There's some cities that were electing black candidates to office, and so the parties did away with ranked choice voting because they really didn't like that. So ranked choice voting is not some new idea that somebody just dreamed up in Silicon Valley a couple of weeks ago. It is a nonpartisan reform. It doesn't favor a particular party, regardless of what some people might try to tell you. It favors the voters. It centers the voters, and it lets you vote your conscience without worrying that you're throwing your vote away if you vote for the candidate you really like. And it is gaining popularity. So, as I mentioned before, you have a couple of states that use an open primary to the top two system. You have Alaska now with an open primary to top four system. Nevada is going to be voting on what is known as the final five, where you have an open primary with the top five vote getters going on to the general, where you can rank your choices. So, did everybody have a chance to try and scan it? I hope it worked. So why would we use ranked choice voting? Here's some of the reasons. Eliminate the spoiler effect. In our current system, anytime you have more than two candidates on the ballot, someone's going to be a spoiler. So we can look back to 2020. You had three Democrats, Bush, Nader, and Gore. Nader was seen as the spoiler in that election. He pulled votes from Al Gore, costing him the election, some would say. If you look even further back in the Republican, you had Perot, Bush Sr., and Clinton. And some say that Perot was the spoiler for the cost of George Bush the election. So our current election system does not incentivize having multiple candidates and giving you the voters more choices. Mitigate negative campaigning, incentivize collaboration. If you talk to candidates who run currently in a ranked choice system, often they'll talk about when they are out campaigning and they see their opponent's lawn sign, they'll go knock on that door anyway because they know their voters will rank them one, but who's going to rank them two? And they need to talk to those people. So it incentivizes a more policy and issue-focused method of campaigning as well. Makes races more competitive. If you live in a city or a state that has a runoff system, like some of the southern states right now, I think Georgia, their last runoff, cost them $70 million. It increases the diversity of candidates, this has been demonstrated, and women candidates, there is no penalty to diverse candidates or women who run on a ranked choice ballot. It leads to more efficient and effective government, and I'll get to this a little bit more, and it's easy and voters like it. So this is the spoiler that we're going to face in 2024, and unfortunately we can't do anything about it. And regardless of how you feel about these candidates, somebody's going to be a spoiler. If we had ranked choice voting, you'd rank these candidates in order of preference. Leading to positive campaigns. So I put a few examples of this in here. After Alaska's recent election where they used ranked choice voting, for the first time in 10 years, first in their Senate and then their House followed suit, a majority of Republicans and Democrats came together to form what they called the Get It Done Coalition, so that they could pass legislation that mattered to the majority of Alaskans instead of sitting in their polarized boxes and not doing anything. And they credit partially ranked choice voting with helping incentivize that, because the next time these candidates go out and run for office, they have to run on a platform of what they've done, not that guy's an idiot, vote for me. And we see statistics that our CD voters are more satisfied with the conduct of campaigns. Unfortunately, I have a laundry list of examples that I love to read. But at the end, my last slide has sources for all of what I'm citing here today. So, it does, as I said, lead to more diversity and more choice. New York City Council, after 2020 election for the first time ever, is a majority women of color on the council that is far more representative of the city as a whole. They credit ranked choice voting with that. It has increased women's representation. California City saw an increase in candidates of color running, and third-party independent candidates win more vote shares under RCV. It doesn't mean that they win more seats, but they do have more of an option, and hopefully the longer that we can vote in the system, that you will see an opportunity for more third-party independent candidates to get elected. It's easy and voters like it. The good news is this year, RCV has run 27 city ballot measures and effectively fought off efforts to repeal RCV. And here's just a sampling in a variety of places where you can see by the statistics, voters consistently say that they understand it, they find it easy to use, they like it, and they would use it again. So, we care about more than we disagree about, despite what the media and the pundits would have to believe. The Center for the Future of Arizona conducts polling, and in one of their most recent polls, they found that more than 80% of Arizonans agree that they think we should have strong public schools with strong principals and teachers. Over 80% of Arizonans agree that we need to address, more than 90% agree we need to address our water crisis. More than 80% of Arizonans think we need to mitigate other environmental issues like wildfires. More than 90% agree that we want to have a strong economy. And over 70% agree that DACA recipients should have a path to citizenship. And this is Arizonans of all political stripes. So we do agree on what we want to see happen. We have much more in common than we would be led to believe, but we need a system that incentivizes our electeds to fulfill their obligation to do and act in the ways that we would like them to do. So, I'm not being cheeky, but we should not be afraid of reforming our system. We've had the same system for the last 100 years, and right now, as we can see, the system is failing us, and it's disenfranchising people. The electorate is frustrated. We should not be afraid of making minor adjustments to the systems that we have that create a framework for increased participation, mitigating polarization, and helping us have better outcomes. So I would encourage everybody to give it a chance.
So these are the points that I'm going to make. I'm going to talk about how long that ballot's going to be, and we're going to have a top five. I'm going to talk about various levels of information that people have about candidates, especially once you get down to those lower level elections. I'm going to talk about what confused voters might do. I'm going to talk about the role of county officials, and we already know that a good portion of the electorate is concerned about the accuracy of the vote totals, and this might lead to more of that. So we have a very long ballot. Other countries don't tend to have this long of a ballot. They have primary or parliamentary elections where you kind of vote for the party. And they don't have to vote for all of these different elections. So we have all of these, and our ballots are now that long. If we're going to put 5 candidates on every race, how long is that ballot going to get? So that's lots of decisions. That's going to be more expensive, and have a lot more paper. So basically, we have all of these elections. How are you going to do a top 5? Do a ranked choice voting in those top 5. So again, if you're talking about a governor's race or a senate race, most voters are fairly well informed because there's lots of advertising, there's lots of discussion in the papers, even online. So people can be pretty well informed about candidates who are running for governor. And they could reasonably rank them 1 to 5. Then there's sort of the mid-level races, House of Representatives. People can't tell you who their representative is. They can pick it out on the listing, but they can't tell you who that is. So there's not as much campaigning at this level. It's not races that are covered much in the news. And media markets don't match congressional districts, so they don't tend to advertise on television or in newspapers because it's not cost effective. So people are going to know a lot less about candidates running for these kinds of races, and asking them to rank 5 candidates may be very difficult. Then you get to the low information races, state legislative races. People don't know those candidates. They've seen, signs on the road, maybe they got a mailer, but those are really low information elections. And how are people going to rank 5 candidates when they have almost no information? And how many decisions can we expect people to make? So if you're ranking 5 candidates, you're making 5 independent decisions. So if we were just talking about 5 election races, that would be 25 decisions, but we have more like 20 election races on our ballot. That's 100 decisions to make, and that's a lot. So, when they expecting voters to do this across a large number, it's too many decisions. And voters can be confused, and when they are confused, they make mistakes. So if you're ranking 1 to 5, if you rank 2 candidates as number 2, ballot is spoiled, and it doesn't get counted. Things along that line. If you are going through it at home, you have your home ballot, and you're marking these rankings, and you realize you made a mistake, you have to send that back or ask for a new ballot, and a lot of people aren't going to do that. So they'll just spoil that particular race. So too many decisions, you confuse voters, and they make mistakes. Too many decisions, voters get tired and they don't finish the ballot. We already have people who don't finish the ballots. They don't vote for the lower level races or all of those judicial races and things like that. If they have to make all these decisions for the top 5 races, by the time they get down to the state legislative races, they may stop voting. To see it. Or they may not vote at all. If you get in a mail ballot that's this long, you might decide, well, I can't do that. I don't have time to do that. So who's going to educate voters on this process? Well, the county officials are responsible for educating voters, and we can't expect that every county will be as able to educate voters as others. Some counties, they don't have a lot of budget for their elections, and so they won't have the money. Partisanship might come into this play in terms of whether or not a county official would like to try to educate voters on how to do registers. The League of Women Voters, we're a really great organization. We like to educate voters, but our reach is limited. We can hold 10 sessions and have 100 people in the audience, and we still will be reaching just a small minority of the voters. Obviously, there are other civic groups out there that will be engaged in this process as well. But again, it's going to be really hard to get to everyone. We can't rely on the media because the media is shrinking. Newspapers are getting smaller and smaller or disappearing. Television news is not talking about this. Many voters don't read newspapers online or in print anymore. They don't watch television, they're streaming everything, so they don't get news programs. The fastest growing resource for news for people under 30 is TikTok. I don't think TikTok is a very good source for accurate news. So again, we have a lot of training that would be needed. And again, we already have people who are suspicious about the counting of the vote, and with ranked choice voting, it could take several days to find a candidate who gets over that 50% threshold. So again, primaries did not cause polarization. There's a lot of reasons for polarization, but primaries did not cause that. There have been primaries in high levels of polarization. There was polarized politics in the early 20th century. There was not polarized politics in the middle of the 20th century. We're back to polarized politics at the beginning of the 21st century. We had primary elections through all of that. They didn't change, they didn't and most changes to the election laws are not as great as people think, and they often don't turn out the way people think.
Vivian Harte will now talk about the two competing propositions. Thank you, Vivian.
There are actually perhaps going to be 3 propositions on our ballot next November. By the way, you can tell me what the date of the general election is next year? November 5th. No, all right, good for you, November 5th, very good. So there will, perhaps, if there are enough signatures, there will be 2 different ballot propositions on November 5th on the ballot: Make Elections Fair and Equal and Better Ballot Arizona. So I'm going to talk about what their similarities are first, and then I'll talk about what their differences are. The first is there is one primary ballot. All of the candidates, regardless of their party or lack of party, will be on that ballot. All the Democrats, all the Republicans, all the Green Party, all the Libertarians, and all the Independents will be on that one primary ballot. And that's according to both of the propositions. Now, you know that in order for candidates to be on a ballot, they have to get their petition signed. So what this is with both of these propositions, anybody, any qualified voter, can sign a petition for any candidate. Right now, you can only sign a petition for a candidate that's of your party that you're registered in. If you go on to eQual, anybody know what eQual is? Tell us what eQual is. Yes.
Are you pointing?
Yes, tell us what eQual is.
You can go to the Secretary of State site and you can put your name and identifying data in, and the candidate that you would like to sign their petition, and your name will go on their internet petition, so to speak, and it gets counted as a signature.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Very good. Now, in that list, you can sign up and sign petitions for a number of candidates, but all from your party that you're registered in. So that's something you can do online.
You can't sign petitions online.
She's talking about the
Candidate.
qualified candidates, not
Candidate petition.
ballot propositions.
She mentioned.
Right. I'm sorry. You cannot sign propositions online. The legislature will not let us do that. But their own candidate petitions you can sign online. They want to make it easy for their people. All right, so with both of these propositions, the candidates still have to get the required number of people signing on their petition. So, who is qualified to vote? Okay, now, the way it is that any person in the primary, any qualified voter, can vote for any person of any party on the ballot in the primary. Now, can political parties endorse and support candidates? Yes, they can do that. However, I'm going to read this. If a candidate has a political party affiliation next to their name on the ballot must also include a statement that the candidate's party affiliation is not an indication of nomination or endorsement, but only reflects the party registration of that candidate. So then we get to the general election. So both of them allow ranked choice voting. So what is this? Okay, so you get your ballot and you write, let's say there are 5 people. So I like the one at the top, number 1. I like the bottom one, number 2. I like the second one, number 3. I like the fourth one, number 4, and the middle one, number 5. So you rank them according to the ones you like the best and the least. So if no candidate gets 50% plus 1 vote as their first preference, then the candidate with the least votes is dropped. That's eliminated. And the second preference is on those ballots where their candidate was eliminated, then are counted. That second preference is counted. And this continues until you get, if there's only one office being filled, that one candidate gets 50% plus 1 votes, or until all the offices are filled. So let's say there's a governor, which is one person. Arizona House of Representatives, 2 people. The Arizona Corporation Commission, 3 people. So it would keep going until all those offices are filled. Now here's where the difference is. Make elections fair and equal. How do you decide how many people will be on the general ballot? General election ballot. With this one, make elections fair and equal, the state legislature prescribes those numbers. And if the state legislature doesn't do it, then the Secretary of State will do it. So if there's one office, there will be 2 to 5 candidates. If there are 2 offices, like with the Arizona House of Representatives, there would be 4 to 7 candidates. If there are 3 offices, such as the Arizona Corporation Commission, there would be 6 to 8 candidates on the general election ballot. Better ballot, Arizona is entirely different in answering this question. With one elected official, you would have the 5 highest candidates would continue on to the general election from the primary. But for each one additional person in elected office, 1 more candidate would continue into the general election. So for example, with the Arizona House of Representatives, since there are 2 candidates that can be voted on, there would be 6 on the ballot. For the Arizona Corporation Commission, with 3, there would be 7, up to 7 on the ballot. Now, ranked choice voting can be done for all general elections. What that means is, with the state level elections, our governor, House of Representatives, the Senate, all those would be, and then all the statewide offices, those would all be done on the general election ballot with ranked choice voting. But cities can opt in or out. They can say we want to do it the traditional way, or we can do it with ranked choice voting. So what happens if 2 or more candidates are tied for the fewest votes? Which one do you drop? Well, then you get out your handy-dandy hat, and you put their names in a hat, and someone who's blindfolded takes one name out. All right, so So the Arizona State Legislature, the majority, you know, when we have ballot propositions, we have to get tens or hundreds of thousands of signatures in order to get it on the ballot. Now, you'll never know how hard the state legislature has to work to get something on the ballot that they want. They have to have a majority vote. That's it. They have to take one majority vote and they get it on the ballot. Very, very easy for them. Very, very hard for us. But, so there is going to be a ballot measure on the November 5th ballot that the legislature put on. HCR 2003. It'll have a ballot number, proposition number, but this is what it's known as right now. It's keeping the status quo. And it's creating it as a constitutional amendment. It has not been a constitutional amendment to this point. And I will read it. It continues the current system and embeds it into the Arizona Constitution, which will make it more difficult to change in the future. They really don't want ranked choice voting. Each party conducts its own primary. Qualified voters registered with that party and only that party can vote in the primary for that party with which they are registered. Independents must request a ballot from the party in whose primary they want to participate, which is what we have now. Wait a minute. So I happened to see the recorder, our county recorder, at a function last night. And she gave me this really nice metallic thing that goes on my refrigerator with all the election dates. So just to let you know, it's coming up soon. February 21st, early voting for the presidential preference election. March 19th, election day for the presidential preference election. July 10th, early voting begins for the primary election for all the other offices on the ballot. August 6th, the election day for the primary election. October 9th, early voting begins for the general election. And you were right, November 5th, election day for the general election. So make sure you vote. And in order to encourage you to vote, I'm going to sing a song for you about voting. And it goes, now this is a song I wrote in 1984. So it's almost 40 years old. I was about 3 years old at the time. Oh, a really good songwriter. Okay, so this is the way the song goes. It's called Let's All Vote. And every 2 years I have to update the words to rhyme. Okay, and it goes like this. Now I'm a second alto, so I have to start low. And it goes like this. In 2024, we need you more. It's time to come to the aid of America. In 2024, I implore, it's time to come to the aid of America. Go to the polls and cast your vote. Time to have your say. Let your voice be heard now. We can make such a beautiful way. We can create such a beautiful day. In 2024, let's open that door. It's time to come to the aid of America. In 2024, let's go. Right now, it's time to come to the aid of America. We need your vote. We need it right now to help democracy. Vote for the people you like the best. You are the key to keep America free. In 2024, I implore, it's time to come to the aid of America. In 2024, let's hear us roar. It's time to come to the aid, come to the aid, come to the aid of America. Excellent.
Excellent. So, if you could hold up the cards, we have a couple people collecting them. And we have a couple of people who will sort them here and hand them to me one by one. I'm going to invite Victor back up. He has one more announcement before we get to the questions.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that I do want to note for our membership is that it's a sad note because Jenny McGeer, a longtime member of the League of Women Voters, passed away on November 6th. And Jenny joined the League in 1965 and is a lifetime member. From the first year of her membership in the League, Jenny became a leader on the board and president of many local and state leagues wherever she was living at the time. Eventually, Jenny and her husband Gordon settled in Tucson. She was on the nominating committee for the League of Women Voters, the U.S., and a member of the National League Board. In 2019, Jenny took part in one of our recordings of a storytelling salon in which she was able to talk about past experiences that's available on YouTube. So I want people to take a moment of silence to be able to acknowledge our loss of Jenny, but also for those of you who've been wondering if there's going to be a memorial service. There will not be a memorial service. That's one of the things Jenny did not want. So to hear that, there will not be a memorial service. But her husband, Gordon, many of you know, I'm sure he would appreciate, receiving cards and notes from folks. So we'll take a moment of silence just to acknowledge and recognize Jenny, who definitely was someone that I, learned a lot from as far as and a very opinionated person and someone that we should all model ourselves after. So we take a moment of silence. Okay, thank you.
Here's the first question. Can you explain how negative campaigning is minimized by open primaries or ranked choice voting? Can you explain how negative campaigning?
That's yours. Let me take that.
Specify the person's vote. Yeah, you should start.
Yeah, sure. So admittedly, the data is mixed on this. There are some cities where and I did have a whole list with all stats and facts, and I left it at home on, which was inevitable, so I apologize for that. But the data is mixed, and I can cite a California study that has a lot of interesting data in it, talking about their election. So I don't know if we're making slides available to folks, but those resources are available. But there are some places where they do show that it mitigates negative campaigning, some places where they show that there's a minimal net effect on negative campaigning. So the goal is, and we do see some instances, and again, Alaska is a great example, although we've only had one election where you had a candidate who ended up winning, who campaigned on a platform of talking about issues that matter to Alaskans, and you had two other candidates that spent a lot of time attacking each other and attacking ranked choice voting. So there is the potential, and what I would say is if you create a system that incentivizes candidates to reach out and talk to a broader swath of voters, you're going to minimize negative campaigning. And we have to see it in effect. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Betsy. And I think the next question is also for you. We're still going to talk about Alaska for a minute. In Alaska, after ranked choice voting was instituted, they had the lowest voter turnout they ever had in the entire history of their state. If ranked choice voting is so complex and confusing that it results in voter suppression, is this what we want?
That's not the data that I saw. Yeah. So I don't know where that comes from. There was an increase as far as I know, and there's other cities that use ranked choice voting that have seen an increase in turnout, and I don't know. I can't address it any further other than to say that
my sister lives in Alaska, and she says they love it up there. And they've had a good turnout.
So maybe we have some fake news here. Misinformation. Disinformation and misinformation. Okay, Maybe you could answer this, Barbara. It seems as if the electoral college is causing us more problems than either open primaries or ranked choice voting. Why are we not changing that first?
There have been attempts to change it for about 100 years. There have been multiple pieces of legislation in Congress to do that. The main problem is it would take a constitutional amendment to eliminate the electoral college since it's part of the Constitution. There is an effort across states, interstate something compact, where states would sign on to this compact and then they would cast their electoral college votes for the national popular vote winner regardless of the vote in the states. So there's a lot of reforms out there, but they haven't been sufficient to change it. I will mention that changing it would cause more problems that we might not think about. Right now, if there is concern about voting in one state in the presidential election, it's confined to that. So if you think about the 2000 election where there was the contention of what was going on in Florida, just Florida had to recount their vote, not the entire U.S. electorate. So we don't really have national elections, we have state elections. There would be unforeseen consequences from changing in terms of things like nationalizing ballot access. Some states have far fewer signatures required to get on the ballot than other states. Would you have to nationalize that if you're going to have a national popular vote total? Some states make it easier to vote absentee, things like that. So there's lots of variations across the states which might affect the national vote total or might require additional national legislation to get to do for.
Thank you. So this question is about election day voting. Not voting in advance, not early voting, not mail-in voting. On election day voting, will that still allow ranked choice voting, or is it only for a mail-in ballot?
No, it would be
Okay.
good election.
And such a long ballot in person, what does that do at the polling site?
You gotta take the time to vote. And again, I would just, the best example is that the other states and localities that do it, they managed to do it. So it's not impossible to overcome the ballot lane.
Maybe we're underestimating the intelligence of the voters. So, here's another question. I have always heard if you are a Green Party, Libertarian, or Independent, your vote is useless. How do open primaries and ranked choice voting change it?
It gives you more, I would say it gives you hope. It gives you more of an opportunity. Again, if you have an open primary, you can qualify right out of the gate. You're incentivized. And if you don't have a rank, if you know that you have an open primary and a ranking system, it incentivizes candidates right out of the gate to participate because they're not going to be shut out at either end of the system. So the hope is that over time, these, with more opportunity, that these parties are going to be able to grow their membership and have less of this, it doesn't matter, who cares, why should I participate kind of attitude.
I'll do the time. One of the parts of these referendum or initiatives are equal signatures. So every candidate would have to get the same number of signatures. Right now, the Libertarian Party doesn't have to have as many signatures to get people on the ballot as the Democrats or the Republicans. That's just because of the formula that we use. So if you have equal signatures, a Libertarian Party candidate would have to have as many signatures on their petition to be on the ballot as a Democrat or a Republican. That might be more difficult for them.
But they wouldn't get their signatures just from libertarians.
No.
They would get their signatures from anyone who's a qualified voter.
Yes. But they don't have the infrastructure that parties have for getting signatures.
Mm-hmm. I like this question because it was something I was wondering myself. For ranked choice voting, how did you decide on 5? To me, 2 is too few, but 5 is too many. Why not 3 or 4?
Because I think 5 offers you the most options without being, 6, 7, 8, you can start to get into too many. 3, you're not really creating a difference. 4, 5 seems like a good choice. I'm not, and I don't really know the science behind why they settle on 5. But there it is.
Maybe you could answer this one, Vivian. Which one does the league support? Is it possible that both could win?
I have no idea which one the league supports. And interestingly enough, it'll be interesting to see which one, if all 3 are on the ballot, the one that gets the most votes is the one that becomes law. And so it'll be interesting to watch. I don't think the league has taken a vote on it to see which one. And it wouldn't be done at the state level, that the state league would vote on it to see which one or ones they would like to support.
It's interesting if all 3 are on the ballot and the one with the most votes wins. That's sort of like ranked choice voting.
In a way.
So the one that wins have to have 50% of the vote.
No, it's just no. The way our voting is now, they would just have to have the most number of votes, even if it's 34%.
So Mary, I can answer that, and I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but they're going to announce it on Monday, so the league did vote to endorse the Better Ballot Arizona ballot at the state level. Yeah, I just know that yesterday, so it's hard to progress.
So the state league voted on it.
Yes.
So if there's 3 propositions, we cut for one of them.
Say that again?
If there's 3 propositions, we pick one of them to vote for.
Well, if there's 3 propositions on the ballot, you can vote yes or no for all 3 of them. So you could vote yes for the one you support and then no for the 2 that you don't support.
Or you can vote yes for all 3 if you want.
That would be a confused one. I love that expression, confused voters and educated voters. Barbara, this one's actually has your name on it.
Oh,
What is your preferred ranked choice voting process?
So my preference is ranked choice voting in partisan primaries. That would lead to each party being able to nominate what they think is their strongest candidate. And then in the general election, the public can decide which party's candidate they prefer. So I'm not necessarily a foe ranked choice voting, but I think it belongs in the primary election, not as much in the general election.
What about this is my question, what about the idea of having for city elections or county elections first to get people used to the idea before we make it statewide?
They could do that. In fact, it's more popular at the city elections. That's where it's been used mostly for a longer period of time. A lot of cities, San Francisco, Minneapolis, have been used it for a number of years. So it has been used there. It's not as used in the state elections.
Some people get used to the idea and they say now, why don't we do it statewide since you've been doing it at the local level? That's it.
I mean, I can add to that. So there was, Voter Choice Arizona, which is the group that has been advocating for ranked choice voting in Arizona, started out trying to do local adoption. And the problem is with the way our elections are run and the way that cities have to answer essentially to the counties and to the states for both funding and oversight. And there were issues around cities being threatened with lawsuits. So even though there were some cities that were amenable to it and wanted to put it on their own initiatives for their populations to vote on, they decided that it was too big a legal risk. So the decision was made to go for a statewide ballot initiative because it didn't seem to be viable to adopt it at the local level.
This question is very near and dear to Arizona. People involved in politics as far as counting votes. We had this happen in Maricopa County. Would ranked choice voting increase the time to count votes?
Well, it would, if you go beyond the first, if no candidate gets more than 51% of the vote in the first, then they start going down, depending on, they don't have to do it for every election ballot. So it might just be one or two of the races that would need to be counted. And it is limited to 5. So typically, they might only have to do one extra round to get someone to 51%, but it could take longer. And it could be held up by late counting of ballots coming.
But Barbara, initially, isn't when the votes are counted initially, it's all computerized, right?
Right.
So the only time that we're gonna have to worry about the hand counting and the problems with, human error is only if it's like within that small percent of votes for the winner, right? What else do we have? Do we have recounts?
Okay, well, that's not necessarily the big count, it's just the initial count. So I think in Alaska for the House race, it took a couple of days to get the outcome.
So one thing I'll say is that there has been an analysis of voting machines in Arizona, and they can accommodate a ranked choice ballot. The tabulation happens very quickly. To your point, it is computerized. What causes a delay in our results right now is mail-in ballots and people showing up day of election to turn their mail-in ballot in, and the cure. So we already have a delay in getting our results. It's not a function of ranked choice voting, it's a function of mail-in ballots. So mail-in ballots can be tabulated, ranked choice voting ballots can be tabulated quickly. That's how we're going to see the delay in results.
And some of those mail-in ballots are from overseas.
That's right.
There's a certain amount of time that those are allowed to come in after the election.
To piggyback on that, someone asks, what are the statistics on the error rate of ranked choice voting in other places? Is counting in ranked choice voting harder? I think you might have answered that.
Yeah, I don't know that it's harder, and human error is a factor in our current system right now. It's not something that's endemic just to ranked choice voting, so.
Any one of you can answer this one. What are plausible explanations for low voter turnout?
Well, let's see, remember my 2 lecture. There are lots of reasons. Young people are less likely to vote than older people just because they move a lot, they don't seem to feel themselves as part of the community, they feel occupied with other things. Economics plays a big portion. People who have more money or more education are more likely to vote than other individuals because it's probably a little bit simpler for them if they've had more education. They also have sort of a better perspective of how politics might be affecting their own lives. Other factors that come into play is just whether or not they think their vote will count. So that could be for a variety of reasons. Or they're just preoccupied. There's so much going on in their lives that they can't think about voting. So people who are going through divorce are not as likely to vote as people who are single or married and things like that. So people's lives come in.
So people who have children, they have to take care of their children, they have to stand in line in order to be able to vote. And in some states, there's a deliberate voter suppression that, oh my goodness, in certain parts of the city, there's an abundance of machines to vote at. And at others, there's hardly any machines, and there's these long lines that you have to stand in line for 6 hours to vote. Deliberately. That's done deliberately to encourage certain people to vote and to discourage other people to vote.
We disincentivize voting in so many ways, and there are fixes. I mean, you could do automatic voter registration. You turn 18, you're registered to vote, and that's it. In the town that I lived for 20 years back in Massachusetts, on election, leading up to election day, they had huge banners and signs all over the town, vote on this date. I mean, we don't incentivize voting, we actively discourage voting, and we disenfranchise people. So there's a lot of fixes that could be done. You can have same-day voter registration, it's an automatic voter registration. You could, there's a whole body of work around how to incentivize voters and how to engage youth voters. And, I like to share a story in 2020 in the Boston City Council race, and if you know anything about Boston, which is where I'm from, it had been predominantly a white male city council for forever. And this was the first race where you really had diverse candidates running, and there was a woman, a Dominican woman who was running for an at-large seat. And we ended up electing the most diverse council ever that year, but Julia Mejia won her race by one vote. One single vote. And I bet you she is so grateful to that one voter that showed up and voted for her. So the idea, we don't talk about it enough, that my vote doesn't count, it sure does, and that vote sure counted to her. So do not minimize the impact that your vote has on a race. And I know I'm speaking to the converted, but to the youth of the room, I would just please share, do not think your vote doesn't matter, it does.
One of these slides talked about sort of how to reach confused voters, make a confused voter an educated voter through media, the league, civic groups. One person asked, what is the role of K-12 schools in promoting civic responsibility?
I think that, I think our last session talked about how budgets and stuff like that are reducing the amount of civics education that's in K through 12. And that would be something to be addressed in terms of encouraging that to come back.
Do any of you think moving local elections to even years would help the turnout?
Sorry. Yeah, well, if it's on the same ballot as like the general election in November, it probably would increase the turnout for the city elections. It's just that those would be buried towards the bottom of the ballot and would be perhaps overlooked. There are a variety of elections that are held at odd years. There are some states, a small number of states that elect governors in odd years, things like that. So, yeah, one thing that Americans have to vote more than other countries. We have primary elections, we have general elections, we have off-year elections, we have odd-year elections, we have special elections.
Runoff elections.
That can be exhausting. Other countries, they have fewer elections. They are called when there's a crisis or something along that line, so there's a high level of interest. And they generally only have to vote for a limited number of offices. So we're asking a lot of Americans. Yeah.
So I'm going to add another category, exhausted voters. So this is for you, Betsy. According to Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, Arizona Readiness Report, RCV requires centralized tabulation / counting. Arizona is a republic with responsibility of our elections in the counties. How do you propose centralizing the multiple rounds of tabulation? Will this increase voter confidence?
Wow, that's a big question.
Centralizing multiple rounds of tabulation.
Well,
Got that for you?
okay, so I can, I could punt and say that's the problem with the Secretary of State to figure out. There is centralized tabulation, but part of our elections are already centralized. And I don't think it's a barrier, I guess is, what I would say.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So votes are counted in the elections department now, in the machines in the elections, Pima County Elections Department. They're actually brought over, so the recorder's office looks at the signatures on the mailing ballots and makes sure that those are matching the signature. And then those are actually, they're wheeled over. Because I've been an observer. They're actually wheeled over in these big carts over to the elections department. And then the elections department, they pay people to come in and actually take them out of the envelope, and what they look for in the envelope, on the ballot is if it's a spoiled ballot. If it's spoiled, it's got coffee on it, or it's chewed up like a dog, or something like that. Then they hand it over to special groups of people, and they have two different parties, or non-parties, because it can be an independent and a Republican, at the computer, and one reads it, and the other one puts it in, and then after they do that, the one who puts it in reads it back to the one who originally read it to make sure it's accurate. And then the great majority of ballots then go on to the machines where they just. So those are centralized here in the county, each county.
Primary elections?
Yes.
I just want to throw this out. Yes, Pima County does have centralized election counting. But what that question is addressing is the centralization of congressman races, anything that's all statewide races. And I've asked this question a couple of times. I asked Stephen Richard this question. And it just seems like people don't have really thought about it. It requires a whole new system somewhere that will run ranked choice voting software and that will tabulate the multiple rounds. And you have to get the images up to the centralized tabulating area place, wherever that is. And right now, that looks like that might be passcode records, but we can't use passcode records in our state to tabulate election results. So the counties are all centralizing everything, and they're sending their numbers to the Secretary of State. That's what's happening. There's going to need to be some centralized functionality run by some power in the state to do that and to pull that function out of the counties. And I've worked in elections in this county since 2017 and in California since 2003. It's just a fact.
But they've been able to.
And it's in your report. This report from Ranked Choice Voting Election Administration said you should read it, pages 6 through 10, says multiple times it remains to be seen how Arizona will tabulate ranked choice voting. It remains to be seen how many laws will need to be changed to make that happen. So if you are going to continue to promote it, you need to figure out an answer to this question.
I think in the proposition, though, it says that those things will be handled by the Secretary of State.
Oh, boy.
Well, that's your answer.
Yeah, but they
I'm not making a judgment on it, but that's the answer.
It's going to require the legislature and the secretary, it doesn't say that. It says it's going to require the legislature and the Secretary of State to rewrite the Elections Procedures Manual and to rewrite state statutes. And they want this done by July 26th.
Yeah, that's the thing, it's not going to affect immediately.
Anyway, I just think it just kind of gets sloughed over and it needs to be addressed.
Other states have been able to figure it out, and we have some brilliant people in Arizona.
Excuse me, you can shut me down my last comment. The two states right now that have statewide ranked choice voting, one state has 600,000 registered voters, and the other state has 1 million registered voters. And they already have centralized processing. They don't have a republic. They don't have other counties rolling up their numbers. It's different. And that's about the size of Pima County, their states. I'm just pointing that out.
And Australia, Ireland, New Zealand are able to do this for their entire country. So it can be figured out.
Well, that's just because things are hard doesn't mean we can't do it.
Right.
You know, one other thing is I think we are already under different laws. I was at a polling place and someone was saying that they didn't have a photo ID, which is required here in Arizona, but they demanded to vote on the federal ballot for the president because it's not required federally to have a photo ID, and they have to let that man vote, right? So I think, we already deal with all sorts of different rules and different laws on our ballots, each and every one we currently do. So hopefully we can just,
Figure it out.
figure it out. Figure it out. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but that's all we have time for. Thank you for a lively discussion, and thanks to all who contributed with questions and comments for the panel. If you want to share the program with others, it will be available on the League website, lwvtucson.org, and on the League's YouTube channel in a few days. I want to thank all the League members who contributed to this program, the Public Programs Committee, the Communications Group, and our Hospitality and Membership Representatives, and our members who collected and sorted the questions from the audience. Lastly, a big thanks to our three panelists, Betsy Boggia, Barbara Norrander, and Vivian Harte, for your commitment to voter education, election reform, and your interesting presentation. So give them a round of applause. Petitions available to sign to put an abortion amendment on the ballot in 2024. And if you want to pick up blank petitions, you can get forms at the League office on Swan. The League is committed to collecting a certain amount of petitions. I also want to mention the holiday party, which is the second Saturday in December. You can sign up on our website or see someone on the hospitality committee to see more details on that. Save the date for our next public program, which will be Saturday, January 13th, and the topic is National Day of Racial Healing. These programs are always free and open to the public, and please consider becoming a member of the League of Women Voters. Thank you for attending.